over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. South Korean fighter jets mistakenly bombed village. A South Korean village near the North Korean border was mistakenly shelled yesterday by two fighter jets from the South's own Air Force, leaving 7 people injured and damaging homes and a church. Is this just a simple mistake, or is this an indication of larger issues? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which they occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is the United States has 28,500 troops stationed in South Korea. Locals in the area have protested about the disturbance and potential danger from nearby training exercises and training grounds for years. Is the United States fighting old wars in a changing world? My guest is a writer, activist, teacher, and analyst, KJ Noh. As always, KJ, my brother, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
So, is this as simple as so many sources are reporting? The bombs were meant to hit a range several miles from the village, but at least one of the South Korean pilots had entered inaccurate coordinates. This is according to the military. Or is there more to this than that?
I think there's a lot more than meets the eye. And the reason why I say that is, first, yes, it seems to be correct that the pilot entered the wrong coordinates. But remember, the target that he hit, was not a few hundred meters away from the actual intended target. It was 5 miles away. There were two F-16s. They flew over this village, and they dropped 8 Mark 82 or 84 bombs. These are 500-pound bombs. And they destroyed 7 structures, including a cathedral and several people's homes. And at least 15 people were injured. I've heard reports that there are another 14 who are troops that were also injured. So this is a major, major issue. And it speaks to a couple of things. One is, why are they doing live fire exercises so close to the North Korean border? This village, Nogongni, is about 20 kilometers from the North Korean border. It's walking distance to the DMZ. And anything that happens there, you can be quite sure that the North Koreans are aware of it. I mean, this is extraordinarily belligerent. Unfortunately, in this case, the belligerency backfired, and the South Korean government or the South Korean military ended up bombing its own citizens. But these were US South Korean exercises. These were joint exercises, and they're being done all the time. Last year, they had 250 days of war games. This year, they're going to have 275 days of war games. A lot of these war games involve live fire exercises like this, which is just extraordinarily not only dangerous, but belligerent. Where is all of this leading? I think this signals that there is some serious escalation or preparation for war. And I think that is the issue that is unspoken as people report about it. It's not a simple, pilot error. It's an entire structure of society that is gearing up for war and doing incredibly dangerous and risky things in preparation for war. And as often happens in this kind of situation, the citizens are collateral damage.
So if they are ramping up for war, is this war between the United States and China? And if so, is Donald Trump trying to wrap up Ukraine so that he can turn his sights to China?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. I think that there is a large body of experts who think that Donald Trump's actions about wrapping up the war in Ukraine really have to do with consolidating force so that they can continue the previous administration's escalations against China. So consolidation for continuation rather than, as some people characterize it, just pure chaos. Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He's just a bull in a china shop breaking everything. No, I think there's something much more deliberate happening, and that has to do with pivoting out of Russia, pivoting out of Ukraine so that they can focus on China. So I think that is a very real possibility. And at the same time, you can see that there are some mitigating or dissenting or contradictory factors inside the Trump administration and their own purported statements. So we have to watch carefully. It's not enough to watch the turn signals. We have to watch which direction the car is actually moving.
Because there are analysts that will say, we got out of Afghanistan in the manner in which we did. Joe Biden did that so he could turn his sights on Ukraine. Then they can make the argument that the United States is now turning away from Ukraine so it can turn its sights on China. But if you lost in Afghanistan after 21, 22 years and $1 trillion, got your hind parts kicked in Ukraine, this is the drunk in the bar that no matter what bar he goes to keeps getting his butt whooped. You need to stop drinking and stay out of bars.
I think so. I think that is very, very good advice. But
and I say that as a guy that has spent a lot of time in a lot of bars. No bar fights, but I've seen a few and spent a lot of time in a lot of bars.
Right, and we know that they don't end well.
No.
These are acts really of self-harm and parasuicidal behavior. But the U.S. seems to be engaged in this. So you're absolutely correct. The U.S. was not able to win in Afghanistan against a ragtag group of goat herders in sandals, driving Toyota pickup trucks. And then they went to Ukraine and they brought the entire force of US technology, NATO combined joint arms warfare doctrine, and they applied it along with sanctions and every diplomatic pressure that they could enforce. And they got their rear ends handed to them. So clearly they can't win in Ukraine. And so what makes them think that not having not won against Russia, that they can pivot to China and fight against a peer competitor, which has one of the strongest economies on the planet, and we know that certainly from the Ukraine war, that industrial war is the nature of modern conventional warfare, and the country that has the most powerful economic and industrial capacity over the long term is going to win in these types of protracted battles. So what makes them think that? I have an answer, but nobody's going to like it.
Well, I may not like it, but if it comes from you, I'm damn sure going to listen to it. So what is the answer?
The answer, and if we were to give it a kind of a technical spin, it's what they call the third offset. Mm-hmm. Third offset means that we have this distributed force, dispersed, that's networked, that can defeat China simply because the fact of its diffusion and dispersion. And that is going to be tied together with multiple standoff weapons that are agile and that are connected through AI. So AI is also going to be part of this story. So they're going to use AI to improve both targeting and decision cycles, speed that up, and have everything networked so that even if there's electronic warfare, we still have such a wide range of assets that can simply overwhelm the target. And here's the other piece, or here's the most important piece. If you read what the hawks are saying in Washington, they're talking about going nuclear. They believe that nuclear warfare has to be integrated. Tactical nukes have to be integrated into the continuum of conventional warfare, that it should be simply a seamless transition between the two. So the quick answer is they're using, they think that they have some kind of technological Wunderwaffe that can beat China. And if that doesn't work, they're going to nuke China. And I'm on record, as is Colonel Wilkerson, as is Norman Finkelstein, that this is probably what is in the cards.
So, final question on this particular point. So, they lose against Russia, and in their infinite wisdom, they decide, now we're going to go knock on China's door. But China and Russia are living in a duplex. I mean, they're Kevin. Wow, thank you, Kevin, for that $20 super sticker. Greatly appreciate that. And what I mean by that is they have decided that they're stronger than allies, and they have signed military support agreements. You just walk into the other side of the corner and knocking on the other door. It's insanity.
Absolutely. I agree with you. So, Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, has already addressed this at the 2 sessions. There are multiple people who've said that China and Russia are inseparable, that it's not it's not a variable, but that it's a constant that creates stability for the world, and they cannot be separated. And I believe that that is very, very true. This is not some kind of opportunistic, marriage of convenience forced on by, momentary, interest. It's a relationship that has been building over decades. And it was simply, kind of congealed when the US threatened both Russia and China, forced them, literally to, cohabitate. So you're absolutely right. It's not simply a duplex. I would say that it's, one, shared condominium, right?
Oh, okay.
They share, the longest land border on the planet. They have each other's backs, both geographically and politically. So it's not going to happen. And there are a lot of people who think that what Trump is trying to do is pull a reverse Kissinger. That is, Kissinger separated China from the Soviet Union. Now they're going to separate Russia from China. I don't think that's going to happen. It really is not going to happen. And it's the, height of foolishness to think that they can get away with something like this.
this may be incredibly naive on my part, but one of the differences that I see between the Kissinger era and today is the China-Russia relationship is a multifaceted, multi-layer relationship with trade and economic expansion being at the forefront. The military alliance is, I don't want to say secondary, but not primary. That seems to be a additional facet that they understand they need to have in order to develop in the economic manners in which they plan. For them, economics is the main thing, and they're going to keep the main thing the main thing. Whereas the United States seems to be just focused on sheer imperialism, and that imperialist perspective is blinding them to the realities that are right in front of their eyes.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, the U.S. is about force, it's about domination, it's about coercion, it's about, as you
full spectrum dominance.
Full spectrum dominance. It's the imperial project. They've never wavered from that, as far as we can tell. Although Trump does signal that he has some neo-mercantile tendencies, which may or may not, come into full fruition.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, this, notion of full spectrum dominance, of unipolarity, that still seems to be part of the DNA, the makeup of the national security ruling elite. And so under those circumstances, it's a strong contrast with China, which, as you point out, seeking win-win relations with all of the world, but certainly with Russia, it has a comprehensive strategic agreement. That means that they're firing on all cylinders, sharing, bed, bathroom, and living room together. Everything is going to be shared. And there is a natural division of labor. There are things that Russia does extremely well, and there are certain things that China does extremely well, resources that Russia has that China needs, commodities that China produces that Russia needs, etc. And so there's a kind of, if you will, a match made in geopolitical heaven, if you will, that creates this perfect division of labor that makes them highly resilient to the kind of predations of an imperialist aggressive agenda. And so I don't think it's going to happen. And as I said, China's approach to the world is win-win. It's trade. China's a trading nation. It has never been a nation of imperial conquest. It's been a nation of trade, of relationships, of diplomacy. It's done that for millennia, and it's continuing to do that. So we see the global South strengthening and building itself out through the BRICS coalition, the BRI, and the other coalitions similar. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you see, that the U.S. is working diametrically opposed to that, and countries will vote with their feet.
And staying on the issue in South Korea, I asked at the top, is the U.S. fighting old wars in a changing world? Your thoughts?
Well, definitely the U.S. is fighting old wars. And, to be historically correct, the Korean War
is still ongoing.
It's still ongoing. The U.S. has never signed or never agreed to a peace treaty. It has always shut down all entreaties for a peace treaty. And even the foundational conditions of the armistice have not been withheld. Remember, China sent 3 million troops and workers during the Korean War to defend North Korea. One of the conditions of the armistice was that all foreign troops have to leave. The Chinese were out of there within 3 years. There is not a single Chinese, military officer in North Korea, except for the ones that were buried in, their heroes' graveyards. And on the other hand, the U.S. still has 28,500 troops US troops that should have left in 1953 that are still squatting Korean territory. But not only are they squatting Korean territory, but they have, to this day, operational control over South Korean troops. The moment they decide they want to take control of South Korea's military, 500,000 troops plus 3.1 million reservists, they get to do that immediately. And so that's the other piece that I didn't say, which makes the US think that it can win a war against China. It's counting on proxies, most notably South Korea for its massive army, Japan for its powerful navy, and also Taiwan, the Taiwan Island separatists.
Will those allies or proxies, will they be as determined at fighting this to the end as the United States is? Or if they get into this full-blown conflict with China, do you see both Japan and South Korea saying, you know what, with North Korea in the mix and possibly Russia in the mix, this one isn't going to end well?
Yeah, certainly it's not going to end well. I mean, it's not possibly in the mix. It is in the mix. North Korea has a mutual defense treaty with Russia. It also has a mutual defense treaty with China, the only one that China has with any country. So they're both, if you will, kind of Article 5, confederates. Anything that happens against North Korea is a war against both Russia and against China. And so I think that it's not going to turn out well, even under the best of circumstances. But in the current moment, in the current situation, all of these quisling proxies are, pardon my French, soiling their underwear, seriously soiling their underwear, because they see what happens to U.S. proxies. They get used up and then get spit out, and then they get defenestrated publicly in the Oval Office, right? I mean, this is the disposal in the Oval, that beatdown that Zelensky got, in full public view. They're very, very afraid that this is exactly the same thing that could happen to them. Leaders of, Taiwan province are saying these types of things. What do we have to give so that we don't end up the same way? Koreans are saying the same thing too. Can we trust that we won't be used and disposed the same way the Ukrainians were? So these are really important questions. I think, once again, people are voting with their feet. The Taiwanese military, their officer corps is leaving the military in droves, and vast numbers of people, if you poll them, say, we don't want to go to war for the U.S., even though our, quisling leaders do.
I was having this very conversation earlier this morning with a colleague, and I was trying to get him to understand that the Taiwanese, they see Ukraine and they're saying, we do not want to be Ukrainized. And he was giving me some heavy pushback on that one. And I saying, partner, you need to take a different look at the world. Get Back With Me asked the question, is there any chance for a reunification of Korea? And that takes me back to the first Trump administration when he stepped into the DMZ, and he was having meetings with North Korea, and there was discussion about is he actually opening up a path for this to happen, and it seems as though that path closed fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think there's been too much, kind of disappointment and betrayal by the U.S. ruling class vis-a-vis North Korea for the North Koreans to come back to the table. I mean, I'm sure they won't reject it if Trump makes some, good faith effort, but I think they will be much, much more wary, much, much more leery. Remember, every single agreement that North Korea has signed with the United States, going back to the 1953 armistice, has been undermined and betrayed by the United States. They are not, as Sergei Lavrov said, not agreement capable. This is true for, three-party talks, the agreed convention, all these meetings, agreements, they all amount to nothing because the US is not coming and sustaining its engagement in a good faith manner from the standpoint of the North Koreans. They see themselves constantly being, mistreated and betrayed, and that promises are never kept. So same thing, six-party talks, all of them failed. And anybody who's honest about the history will tell you this happened because the US did not uphold its side of the bargain. So is there a possibility that Trump might de-escalate again? It's possible. We're watching very carefully who he's appointing to engage. And the picture is still not quite clear. But to the extent that they talk about complete, verifiable denuclearization, what they call CVID, that's a non-starter. If they start off with CVID, then North Korea is going to tell them to take a very long walk off a very, very short
pier.
Here, yes.
Do you also think that North Korea is sitting back looking right now at the relationship and the discussions between Donald Trump and President Putin, in that, 2 or 3 days ago, 4 days ago, Trump is talking about Putin as though they're going to play a round of golf at Mar-a-Lago pretty soon. And then today you read Trump is imposing stricter tariffs on Russia. So I'm just wondering, is Kim Jong-un sitting back looking at this saying, he's try to play the same game on me? No, I'm not falling for the banana in the tailpipe again.
Yeah, no, they're not. They're not going to fall for that. And of course, they're watching the situation very clearly. North Koreans are very, very savvy political agents. They take a weak hand and they play it very, very powerfully. That's why North Korea has lasted, this tiny, small, impoverished country has lasted longer than the Soviet Union. It's the longest running, continuously existing socialist state on the planet. And they didn't do that by being slouches as far as their political observation and their political negotiations are concerned. But I think they are concerned about the South Korean exercises with the UK. There's a new set of exercises, even after, this bombing catastrophe, civilians, being bombed. The US says that it's still going to go ahead with these new Freedom Shield exercises. And, it did 250 days of exercises, 275 days this year. And they're going to go ahead with another 10 days of massive, belligerent exercises that are essentially rehearsing decapitation, invasion, occupation of North Korea. The North Koreans have signaled that they are very, very unhappy about this, and they're potentially likely to make their displeasure known in some concrete fashion to be determined. But going back to the earlier, question by the viewer, is there a chance for reunification of Korea? I say never. South Korea has been a single entity. Korea has been a single entity for over a millennia. You could easily argue 1,300 years. Everybody has been living together on the peninsula as a single, ethnic grouping. And that was cut in half arbitrarily in a 30-minute process by two American colonels with a ruler and a National Geographic map. And 1/3 of Koreans in the South have relatives in the North. Of course, they yearn for that reunification. But at the same time, it's not going to happen unless the US allows de-escalation. And the US has never wanted conflict to de-escalate on the Korean Peninsula because that's its toehold onto the Asian continent against China. It's literally the on-ramp. And they want that continual seething conflict so that they have a pretext to continually escalate against China.
Staying with issues in South Korea, I think this was a couple days ago, maybe last week, court orders South Korean President Yoon released from jail for his criminal trial. over martial law. A court ordered impeached Yoon Suk Yeol to be released, a move that could allow Yoon to stand trial for his rebellion charge without being physically detained. What is the update on the trial of impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol?
So there are two separate processes happening at the same time.
Okay.
One is an impeachment trial in the Constitutional Court. That process has run its course, and all the testimony has been given, all the arguments have been delivered, and now we're just waiting for the Constitutional Court justices, 8 of them, to render a decision. If 6 of them say that he broke the Constitution, that he violated the Constitution, he is impeached, and then there'll be an election for a new president in very, very short order, 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, there's also a parallel process where Yoon Suk Yeol, despite having immunity as the president, has been charged not with violating the Constitution. He's been charged with sedition, treason. Those are the charges that he's facing, and that's why he's being held in a prison in Seoul, and that's why he's facing a criminal court case. Now, his defense team, which are clearly, they're experts in lawfare, they argued a kind of procedural case in which, because between the time that Yoon was initially detained and the time that he was formally charged with sedition, his initial period of detention had expired. And they say he should have been released after his initial expiration rather than kept in detention. Therefore, he needs to be released right away. And the prosecution is arguing, he was detained because there's still a question. We were arguing the merits of the court case, so we entered this kind of gray area. But the court has argued that he needs to be released immediately. The prosecution will appeal it, but if he is released, this will be very, very bad news. I mean, it essentially will be, in my opinion, the start of a civil war, because already we have the beginnings of a civil war in South Korea. Extreme far right followers of Yoon, supported by US tech companies, most notably YouTube, are creating this Maidan type situation. They've already attacked a courthouse, and trashed it, destroyed it, and there's massive agitation. And all of these people, right-wingers, are hitting the streets, waving American flags and holding signs in English.
And this is not the first. When Yoon was originally back in December, we were seeing the same display.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But it's been ongoing, and it's gotten more and more intense. And clearly, YouTube is doing nothing. It's just letting this, kind of escalation happen. And the argument that they are making is that Yoon was impeached by the Chinese, that this is Chinese interference and North Korean interference, and that Yoon is fighting against the Chinese, and that the opposition party is in the pocket of China and North Korea. It's absurd, but it fits in with the geopolitical contestation that the US propaganda machine is pumping out, which is why it's so interesting, that convergence of messaging. So I think there's some very, very dangerous possibilities ahead. If Yoon gets out of prison, he is going to, I think that he's going to consolidate forces. He's going to ignore the impeachment. And I think that we're going to be back at square one with Yoon declaring himself a dictator. I have said that when he declared himself dictator, he had planned also to trigger a false flag attack from North Korea, essentially escalate to war against North Korea. And if that happens, what happens immediately is the US takes operational control over South Korean troops, which they can do anything they want to, escalate to war, even send them to Ukraine, which is why it's so neatly symmetrical with these fraudulent allegations of North Korean troops fighting in Kursk, which nobody can find even the slightest, credible evidence of.
I was gonna get. Well, you know what? Let's hold off on that. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. Folks, let me also remind you that this show is live, but you can watch the show anytime you want to. We're trying our best to get to 10,000 viewers, so please call your friends, call your enemies, call everybody, and let them know that. I mean, KJ Noh, folks, listen to this analysis. You're not getting this on MSNBC or MSNBCIA. You're not getting this at CNN. You may not agree with everything he says, but if you don't, there's something wrong with you. So, again, you can watch this, come back and watch it again. Please let your friends know that that this is a program that they need to tune into. We're trying our best to get to 10,000 viewers. Okay, so now to the point about, so the BBC is now reporting North Korea has sent more troops to Russia. This is according to a South Korean spy agency. North Korea has sent more soldiers to Russia and redeployed others to the front line in the western Kursk region. This is according to South Korea's intelligence agency. It said the exact number of extra troops sent was unknown, but military officials quoted a South Korean in South Korean media. They believe it was 1,000. KJ, in early January, South China Morning Post reported a similar story. The SBU said the men's capture provided, quote, indisputable evidence of the DPRK's participation in Russia's war against our country, end quote. It showed a Russian army ID card issued to a 26-year-old man from Russia's Tuva region bordering Mongolia. And KJ, here's the thing. Tuva is a republic of Russia. So is it Occam's razor that says usually the simplest answer is the best answer? You get a guy from Tuva, you get a guy with Tuvan ID. Maybe he's from Tuva. And Tuva is, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is a Russian republic. Again, I had this conversation with a colleague today, and he just didn't want to hear it. I said, man, Russia is the largest landmass in terms of countries. It's the largest landmass in the world. It's got 6 damn time zones, and it has, I don't know, 50 ethnicities. People ranging from people who look like Putin to people who look like you. I mean, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are Koreans in Russia. We call them Koryo Saram. They're from Korea. It's actually one of the largest Korean communities outside of the Koreas. They're Tuvans, they're Buryats, they're all Northeast Asians, they're Mongolians, they're all Northeast Asians. They all look Asian, and unless you know exactly, how to distinguish, they're going to look East Asian. They're going to look Northeast Asian. So what they've done probably is
wait.
Yeah.
You saying that just reminded me of the CEO of TikTok telling the U.S. Senator, no, sir, I'm not Chinese. I'm Singaporean. Yes, but weren't you in the Chinese army? No, sir, I'm Singaporean. I'm from Singapore. Here we go.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So they all look alike, and who cares? What nationalities. If he looks Asian, he must be Chinese. If they look Northeast Asian, they must be North Korean. But this is absurd, and you're absolutely right. I think Occam's razor is a really good guide here, because if they're saying 10,000, 100,000 North Korean troops, why is it that the troop that you have quote unquote captured has a Tuvan ID, right? Why? Did they give all of them Tuvan IDs then? And what's the point of that? And this ID is not simply newly issued ID. It looks like it's several, it's like the guy
a day or two.
He's had it a day or two.
He's gone to the library with that card a couple times.
Exactly. So they gave all of them aged false ID. I mean, this is the Russian government. They could give them any ID they want to, and it would be new ID. But why did they give them this dog-eared, strange ID, that... I mean, you just have to use some very, very basic common sense. Here's some more common sense. North Koreans don't speak Russian.
I was gonna. That was my next point. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if you send North Korean troops to fight with Russians, they're not going to be able to talk to each other. And secondly, and this is very important in military, strategy, they don't have interoperable gear. Interoperability between militaries is incredibly complex. It takes years and years and constant rehearsal to make that happen. So
that's why the United States is training with the South Koreans.
Yes, all the time.
And they do it every year.
They do it every year, and they still can't get it right. That's why they're bombing, Korean villages, right?
Right.
But without interoperability and without language, you are not going to get a military force that does anything for you, that supports you in any fashion. Militaries, especially Russian military doctrine, is built on networked communication, where you have to have instantaneous communication and instantaneous decision, and all of this is coordinated in very, very complex ways. And to think that you can just send in a bunch of people who don't speak the language and are not interoperable, that cannot communicate with your force, I mean, this is a kind of mindset that thinks that war is something out of, kind of Stone Age battles where you just send bodies onto the field. This is Braveheart or, some Civil War reenactment. It's not. This is modern, war doctrine. It's all joint arms, networked communication that makes that happen. And it's not going to happen if you send people, troops that are not interoperable, that don't speak the language. It is an absolute absurdity. And every time I see them trot out some North Korean or, purported North Korean, I think, oh my God, they're doing this again. I speak Korean. I know that that's not a Korean accent. Don't
tell me that accent is from Mississippi.
Almost, yes. Might as well be. Yeah.
Well, this story also reminds me of the worn trope about the babies in the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
When the United States first went into Iraq, mm-hmm. there was the story of the Iraqi troops going into the hospital, taking the babies out of the incubators, throwing them on the floor, stabbing them with bayonets, all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then that proved to be not true. Mm-hmm. Then when the Ukraine conflict broke out, mm-hmm. one of the first stories you heard about was, oh my God, Russia has bombed this maternity hospital in Ukraine, and mm-hmm. all the women and all the babies. And what you find out is it hadn't been a hospital for quite a while. They had shut the hospital down, turned it into a communication center, and it was a justified target. We hear the same trope over mm-hmm. and over again. The minor details will change, but the basic premise remains the same.
And, so here again, this is a lack of basic critical thinking, right? Kuwait is a tiny country. It has, in the 1990s, it had a population of maybe 2, maybe 3 million. Minuscule population. And the allegation was that, Iraqi troops had marauded, gone into a hospital and taken 500 premature babies, tossed them out of their incubators and left them to die on the cold, hard floor. Now, that's very shocking as a story, but remember, with a population of 2 or 3 million, you're lucky if you're going to have 500 premature babies in a year. And of those preemies, it's inconceivable that you would have all 500 of them clustered in a single hospital on a single day. Just the math doesn't work out. The basic common sense, critical thinking doesn't function. But people absorb that. They fall for that hook, line, and sinker. Why? Because Hilton and Knowles, which is a very, very skilled PR firm, trotted out, this young girl, Naira, and she did this, Academy Award worthy performance of saying she was present and she saw them throw the babies out. And, it's like, it chokes me up to watch it, even though I know that she's lying through her teeth. So it was a very, very well engineered, piece of PR. It was a propaganda stunt designed to manufacture consent for war. And we have to see these allegations of quote unquote North Korean troops that are more elusive than the aliens at Roswell, right?
I've seen them.
I think a lot of people actually have seen them.
I've
There's
seen them.
better evidence for the aliens at Roswell than for the North Koreans in Kursk.
A couple of those bars I've seen them. They like bourbon. Okay. So okay, let's move. Well, let me ask you this. As you see, shifting gears to Ukraine just for a moment, as you see, what you saw last Friday at the White House with Zelensky and that performance art that we saw on Friday, and then there's all this parading around in Europe with the emergency meeting of the European leaders and Zelensky, and now the European leaders are behind him. And then Zelensky, I guess, either gets struck by lightning or hears the voice of God and calls Trump and says, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. Y'all can't take a joke. I was only kidding." But where do you see this now, particularly with this so-called minerals deal?
I think it's a good question. I think, it's still up in the air. I mean, let's just go over some of the facts, So there was the disposal in the Oval. I mean, he was defenestrated out of the White House because he was not playing according to the script that he was giving. He went off the reservation. Remember, Zelensky is NATO Quisling. He has his handlers, probably MI6, and he was given a script with which to read. Essentially, he was brought before the judge to enter a plea because this was, he was going to go for a plea bargain, and he reneged on the plea. And so that's the moment at which J.D. Vance kind of reminded him, J.D. Vance, kind of like the prosecutor said, remember your script, you're here to plead contrition, to say thank you, and then to sign away the rights of Ukraine critical minerals for perpetuity, because, it's all about, what can we get, and it's understood that's how, realpolitik works. And he went off script. There are people saying that it was a trap for him. Not at all. It was Zelensky that went off script. And so then they slammed him down hard. They tag teamed him. And essentially he was defenestrated. And the judge, in this case, President Trump, said, take him away. Take the convict away. He was taken away. And then he went to Europe. And then he got, his kind of consolation prize. He was licking his wounds. And he was getting extremely, awkwardly long hugs from European leaders. I wanted to say to them, please get a hotel, right? But it was just overkill. And then now he's, kind of had this Damascene conversion, and everything is good, and he's going to sign, and, we're going to hand over our resources in perpetuity, do with us what you will. I don't think it's going to work, and it's not going to be so easy. First, because Zelensky is still unapologetic. He has refused to apologize. He's willing to sign, but he's not willing to, kind of
Genuflect.
genuflect. I mean, what he really needs to do. I mean, there's this thing, I think was Emperor William in Canossa, and he had to sit kneeling in front of the Pope in a blizzard for 3 days before the Pope would let him in and accept his apology. Until Zelensky does something, politically comparable to that, I don't think that the U.S. is really willing. I don't think the Trump administration is actually willing to take him back on. I think that more likely that he will be pushed out. He will go the way of DM and any of a number of other U.S. quislings who just became too uppity and too big for their britches. The piece here, I think, which is interesting, is remember that Zelensky, and people seem to forget this, Zelensky is not a politician. He never was a politician. He was a comedian. He was an actor. And he was...
And not a good one at that.
Not a good one at that. I mean, very, highly, cringeworthy, some of the things that he did. But as this kind of performance artist, I think there's a strong element of narcissism that drives him. And I think he really enjoyed being validated and valorized around the world, having his spread on Vogue and going to the academies and the Grammys, whatever have you, and just, having this endless adulation as a performer. And now that he's run out, now that his, meter has clocked out, he doesn't want to let go of that. And so there's some part of him that I think is very much willfully attached to this, narcissistic ego inflation that he has been receiving. And he's unwilling to genuflect and let go of that for the necessary good of the country, which, my God, I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people have been killed already? I mean, isn't that enough? Shouldn't we actually be working for peace if you are some kind of meaningful and, responsible leader? But no. I mean, he's, taking orders from, the Europeans, from the British, and he's also trying to feed his ego and keep continuing. And, I can hear the echoes of, in the White House, will no person rid me of this, pesky comedian, right? I mean, I think that's the refrain that we're hearing, or the echoes of it that we're hearing right now.
Tim MC, this is really funny to me, calls it's Imperial Puppet Theater. And Tim, I might have to use that in my next op-ed. I will credit you, Tim MC. Welcome to Imperial Puppet Theater. Final point on this: the minerals, so-called minerals deal. From all that I've read, Donald Trump has presented this as though Zelensky signs tomorrow, which would be Saturday, and Monday, money starts flowing into the United States. When in fact, they know that these strategic minerals are there, but they don't know the size of the actual deposits. There's a lot of
Geoeconomic or geopolitical.
The folks that dig in the ground, and I forget the name. Anyway, they've got a lot of digging, and they've got a lot of research, a lot of mapping to do, and then they have to start digging mines and geological. That's where I'm geological. Then it could take up to 20 years before the United States started to see any type of return on a project like this. We were talking to Yolian Agbu yesterday about Congo and how Congo has deposits of these minerals that are being exported by Rwanda. And one of the key elements that came out of that whole conversation was, and this is a very long way to get to this point, that China actually processes 90% of the strategic minerals that are accessible in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they're trying to help African nations process their own minerals so that they can move higher up the production chain, higher up the value chain. But certainly most of the processing is done in China with Chinese processes, with Chinese technology, with Chinese patents. The Chinese almost have a seal on the processing of critical minerals and rare earth minerals. And so anything that needs to happen somehow has to, go through China. And so for the US to think that it can simply, have this, contract, have Zelensky sign it over. I mean, certainly they're thinking over the long term. This is why Zelensky is signing it over in perpetuity. I mean, this is like 19th century, resource colonialism, right? I mean, it's just, just a throwback to
the beers and the diamond mines.
Exactly. It's the most naked kind of colonial extraction. But even so, you still have to think of the long term. The money's not going to start flowing right away. This is a multi-decade project, and it will still require along the way Chinese support, Chinese cooperation, Chinese technology, Chinese IP. And I think that's the piece that they really have not thought through.
Final question, and shifting gears back to domestic politics. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, this is from the Washington Post, ignites anger on the right after ruling against Trump. Conservative allies of President Trump have called her evil, a closet Democrat, and a DEI hire because she sided with the so-called liberals on the court on the issue of whether or not the president has the ability to impound funds and whether or not USAID has to actually pay contractors that have already performed the work and the work has been accepted. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell y'all something. I went to law school. KJ, I went to UC Davis. I went to law school. I took contracts in law school. For 25 years, I was a contract administrator with a very large telecom company, negotiated federal contracts. When you sign a deal, when you sign a contract, and the person that you sign for performs the work and you accept the work they've done, you got to pay them. You got to pay them. You don't have to go to the Supreme Court to figure that one out. Donald Trump lost on a idiotic appeal. KJ, now the woman that the left said was incompetent, they said she had no business being on the court, and the conservatives, they said she was a member of the Federalist Society. She had already made up her mind on how she was going to hold or decide on cases that came before her. The conservatives said, oh, this is misogynistic. Oh, you can't say this about her. Oh, she's the next best thing to sliced cheese. Now she's a DEI hire. She's evil, and she's a closet Democrat simply because she went to law school, took contracts in law school, and understands how contracts operate.
Well, Wilmer, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit about the contract piece. And I know you are the legal scholar here, but I actually took the time to read the Alito dissent. And they're making an interesting argument. And it's not completely, out of bounds. First thing that they say is, this is about, they're making a sovereignty argument, which is to say that a sovereign immunity bars a suit by private parties seeking to impose a liability which must be paid by public funds. That's a complex argument. I think it can be litigated. Certainly, there's room for discussion around that. But essentially, what we're saying here is not simply about contracts between two independent parties. It's about contracts between private companies and the US government. And there you have a whole bunch of other things that play into the legal reasoning. The second argument they make is that why is the judge ordering universal relief? That is to say, there are two organizations that have brought suit. Two of them, just two of them have brought suit, but the judge has ordered universal relief for everybody. The order encompasses more than just the respondents, and under good jurisprudential reasoning, a court may not order a remedy that is more burdensome to the defendant than necessary. So the question is, why is this universal relief when it's only two people who have brought the suit? I mean, yes, you can release the money to these two organizations, but they didn't get $2 billion. And then the last argument of the dissenting opinion is that this is highly suspect in the way that it's set up, because the judge has said imposed a TRO against the government and said that the TRO, temporary restraining order, was non-appealable. But they're arguing that what happens as a result of this TRO is not temporary, it's not reversible, and it's not even a restraining order. It's actually a mandatory injunction requiring affirmative action, that is payment in the form of $2 billion of taxpayer money that may or may not be recuperable if there's any flaw, with the legal reasoning. And so I think they make a reasonable argument here. It's very rare that I would agree with anything that says. But in this situation, I actually do think they made, a strong argument. But it goes back to a larger question, which is a question about, the constitutional order, the political order. And I think the simplest way to characterize it is from the standpoint of the right that pushed for her appointment. Essentially, they're saying, we appointed you so you could do our will. Is there no honor among thieves, right? I mean, essentially, we appointed you as the neutral, independent arbiter of a separate branch of government. Why are you not doing what we want you to do? That's the core contradiction. And I think that it is really the contradiction of the U.S. political system. It's essentially, it fails a basic test of procedural justice in that the person who has an interest in the outcome shouldn't get to pick the judge. If you want an independent judiciary, the executive shouldn't get to pick the judge. It's like, that chocolate cake thing, right? The person who cuts the chocolate cake doesn't get to pick the slice, right? Somebody else picks the slice. And it's the same thing. The person who has interest in the outcome shouldn't pick the judges. And there would be different ways to organize it. Many countries do that. But in this situation, you've set up a contradiction, and it has kind of unmasked, the kind of fraudulence of the judicial system, which is the simple fact is that the Supreme Court, despite its, mythology of being a neutral arbiter, is actually the most ideological and the most anti-democratic institution. It's what people fight for. It's when they debate presidential elections, they say presidents come and go, but Supreme Court judges are for life, And so it's not about appointing neutral referees, but it's about a deep political fight. And this time, that appointment didn't quite work out the way they wanted it to. And so there's sour grapes and anger over that.
And one of the things that I have been saying since the birthright citizenship issue, and we know that one of Donald Trump's main parts of his plan is We're going to flood the zone with suits. Once this stuff gets to the Supreme Court, I basically pick the court. They will side with me. I was telling people, don't assume that it's always going to go that way, because with lifetime appointments and those lifetime appointments isolating the individuals from political influence, when it comes to issues such as this, you're not always going to get the decision that you think you're going to get. Sometimes they will fall back on their legal training and do what the law says they're supposed to do. So we'll see what happens as more of these cases make their way to the court, and whether or not Amy Coney Barrett can hold her ground and actually revert to the legal training that she received in law school.
I think it's going to be a bumpy ride either way. I think everybody, buckle up. It's going to be quite a drama, and it's like that, a sports game. The umpire is correct until they rule against you, and then they are the scum of the earth, right? So,
and unfortunately, we don't get instant replay with the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
KJ Noh, my brother, thank you so much for your time, man. Greatly appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend, and I look forward to having you back. Thank you. Always a pleasure. Hey, folks, again, we're trying to get to 10,000, so please recommend the show to your friends and to your loved ones, and even to your enemies, and see if we can get as many likes as possible. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episode on Monday. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the description. Remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Folks, see y'all next week. Until then, I'm Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed weekend. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.